Hot mind. You too. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate your being with us for this information session. And let me ask you first off to take a moment to silence any mobile devices that you might have so that we don't get ringing and all those kind of good things happening during our meeting tonight. And before we get started, I want to take just a few moments to recognize a number of folks that have helped us through this process. As many of you know, back last fall, the state legislature granted us some funds to begin an economic development project out in an area that we have known for many years as Great Meadows. And so our economic development folks at BDI began to work on that project, and quickly it became understood that there were a lot of questions and concerns in our community about the project. And so we felt it best to take a step back for just a little bit and take time to listen to those questions, listen to those concerns, and then to take some more time to work together with our community partners to see how well we could address those concerns. So that's what we've been doing over the past 6-7 months or so. And so I want to recognize a few folks who have helped us through that process during this time. And up on the panel tonight, you'll see folks from Foothills Conservancy. I think they're down on that end. Michael and Michael Gaffney, and then from the Catawba Riverkeeper, we have Grant Buckner and Brandon Jones. From Lake James Environmental Association, Joanne Deo. And then to my right, have our folks from BDI, Alan Wood and Dr. Joel Welch. We have folks from the media with us tonight, Marty Queen from the paper, and I think Sharon, I saw Sharon a second ago, she's McBriar with the News Herald. Appreciate them being here tonight. Then to my immediate right, our county manager, Brian Epley, and Alan Glines is in the room. There's Alan. Thank you, Alan. Kay Drone, our clerk's with us tonight. Also have tonight some folks from McDowell County who've been working with us on this project. Have the McDowell County Manager and Economic Development Director, Ashley and Chuck from McDowell. Appreciate them being here tonight. Our representatives, Hugh Blackwell, Warren Daniel could not be with us tonight. They were not able to attend. And I believe that's all the folks. Let me tell you that if you have questions tonight as we go along and you are mobile savvy and would like to present those questions, you can use the address Great Meadows Info at BurkeCountyNC.org, and those questions will come to our clerk and she'll be able to present them, and you won't have to make a stand to do that. She'll help us with that as we go along. Did I get that right, Madam Clerk? Yes. Okay. All right. With that, again, our appreciation for you being here tonight. Folks, there's some more folks coming in. We got a number of seats up front. Don't be bashful. Just come right on down. And I think we've got probably 10 or 12 seats in here somewhere. So just please come on down and be seated. All right, with that, I want to recognize our county manager, Brian Epley. He has been working with us on this project. He's going to make our presentation for us tonight. And then after that, we'll have a time of question and answers. And we'll just go from there, okay? Mr. Manager.
Oh, that's really loud. Tone that one back just a shot. So as our chairman was saying, we sincerely appreciate the participation of each of you and your time and your talent. I think that it's really the tip of the spear for our conversation tonight. I've put together a few short slides that I think will help guide the conversation. And as Chairman Britton said, there have been some questions submitted through this email portal ahead of tonight's meeting, so I'll address most of those as I go through. If there's unanswered questions or new questions that come in, we'll deal with each of those, and then we'll conclude with a period of question and answer just from the audience. So if you have questions, everybody will have an opportunity to present those, and we'll answer the ones that we can. So I'd like to start just with a rough timeline of how Great Meadows came to fruition to this part. BDI, which Alan Wood is the CEO, Dr. Joel Welch is here representing the board, is an economic development engine or extension of county government. It is a nonprofit that is funded through public-private partnerships. So all of the towns and cities inside Burke County are members. There's also private membership that contribute, and the county is one of those members. And BDI represents the economic development interest of all of these public and private agencies to try to, with an aim of creating tax base to help fund government and to create jobs for our community. And this has been a project that's been on their radar for some time. I think that sometimes there's a misconception when we start moving that these things are brand new. And I think the reality is maybe even further back than 2008, this property and this project has been a point of discussion. I arrived in Burke County in February of 2023, and it was one of the first things that Alan and his team began talking to me about. And I think it does present really a transformational opportunity that at least warrants a discussion and analysis if it can be done in the appropriate way. So all the way back in 2008, there was a Duke site readiness study on the project. Fast forward to 2017, and I believe Alan presented in Raleigh to the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. A quick Google search will fill you in on who they are, but they're essentially the BDI for the state. So they're funded through the General Assembly and through private funding to represent the state of North Carolina in the world of economic development. So it's really been, again, a point of conversation for some time. What really, I think, expedited and changed the conversation was a grant from the North Carolina General Assembly for $35.8 million in October, right? That was the game changer that took it from concept to real conversation. What's important to know about the money, $35.8 million, came from two state funding sources, right? So not all of that money is unrestricted. Roughly $22 million of that 35.8 is tied to that property via law, and it's essentially for capital expansion. So it can be used for land acquisition. It could be used for really any capital cost required to get that property suitable for development. The other roughly $13.8 million is restricted to water and wastewater, so water and sewer infrastructure development, which is one of the reasons this property hasn't developed over time. The property has been zoned, the vast majority of it has been zoned industrial since Burke County began zoning in roughly 1998. So zoning's still somewhat new in Burke County. It's only about 25 or 26 years old. And the original zoning map that was created zoned this, the vast majority, about 440 acres of this property is industrial then. I think that what has really challenged the development from an economic development and industrial perspective is no access to public infrastructure. And so roughly of the $35.8 million, I think it's important to keep in mind about 13.8 is tied to that. Now, from the financial perspective, neither land acquisition or public infrastructure is totally funded at this time. The land is valued at $25,000 per acre. That comes to about $32 million. The public infrastructure expansion and development cost is estimated to be north of $50 million. So 22 is less than 32 and 13.8 is less than 50, which means that this is just an incremental step, but neither are fully funded, and both will be reliant on future funding from the North Carolina General Assembly or grant opportunities if they were to become funded over time, right? So I just think that's important to keep in mind. All of that money at this time is housed in separate interest-bearing accounts that the law requires. It goes through very thorough audits, and it will every year as long as it's in existence. So when I think what created a lot of the questions was the pace that expedited grant really dictated. And we know in December, January timeframe, there was an application for rezoning for the bulk of the property, roughly 1,353 acres. Again, 440 of that is already industrial, so it was the net between 1,353 and the 440. But from our perspective, there were more questions than there were answers, and I think the pace maybe caught some folks off guard, and we didn't have time to really answer all those questions appropriately. And so really between the county commissioners and the BDI board, there was a joint decision to withdraw that rezoning application for the amount of time that it took to listen and consider. And I think that's what we've done to this point. Over the last roughly 7 months, we've communicated with multiple homeowners associations. We've had public input at county commissioner meetings. We've, as far as I know, answered every phone call and tried to respond to email as people had questions about this project. And we've used that input to really design standards. I think the most common way to think about it is what we're here to talk about tonight is deed restrictions. So these will follow the land, whether BDI purchases the land or not. These are legislative actions that will be tied to that land that are much more restrictive than state law requires or than county code requires. And we designed them, I would say surgically, to deal with the concerns that we heard from the community. And I'm excited to cover those with you all tonight. Again, I've said this several times publicly, my goal is not to persuade or convince. My goal is to inform and ask questions in an objective, professional way, okay? So that's why we're here tonight. Before I tell you what those are, I want to spend just a moment telling you why I think economic development, whether this is the path and the most appropriate process and project, or if there's other innovative ways. I want to tell you why I think briefly economic development is so critical in Burke County and why we need to be more intentional about trying to create higher paying jobs and why we need to be more intentional about trying to be innovative in tax-based investment, because I think that those are critical to our relevancy over the next decade. The first thing that I would say is there's a lot of folks that are really involved in this project that give it some legs, that make it move. This isn't something that one agency could move by itself, and that all starts with the General Assembly, as I said, but certainly the North Carolina Department of Commerce, both Burke and McDowell counties. And I think the state is interested in this project and this site because they want to continue this culture of business-friendly climate. For the last 2 years, North Carolina has been ranked #1 in the entire nation for business-friendly climate. I think that's because we have the lowest long-term fixed cost, lowest corporate income tax rate in the entire country. We have a growing population when many states are losing population. We have a fairly steady climate, and we have non-unionized labor for the most part. So I think that all of those things create an environment where business can flourish. I think the General Assembly is putting real consideration into our project because of the other projects in the state of this size. Really nothing west of Greensboro or the Triad has seen significant state investment. So that Western North Carolina compartment, in essence, has been left behind. And I think that garners some momentum from legislators and likely led to the grant that we saw back in October. As we move through what I would consider target markets, advanced manufacturing, which are robotics and machining and those type of industries, auto manufacturing and aerospace are the industries that we think will provide the most robust tax base and the most meaningful jobs. So that's what we would try to target. One of the reasons that we think that that the location of this property is so strategic for those industries is because of our proximity to other international direct manufacturing companies. Within an 8-hour drive, there's about 13 or 14 direct automotive manufacturing facilities. And so whether this property would serve as a supply chain or whether this property could serve as direct manufacturing, it likely is well positioned to be competitive. We also know that workforce continues to be the top draw for economic development clients, and really of all things that they're looking for. And within about a 60-minute drive, we've got a total population of about 2.2 million people, which again, stands out and presents some uniqueness to this property, not to mention the access to 40 and within an hour and a half of 3 international airports. So again, why should we be focused on innovative economic development in Burke County? Just a couple data points here, and I'll move quickly. But I hope, again, whether it's this project or others, we all buy into the idea that that economic development is competitive and we have to be innovative in our approach. This is just a map of North Carolina that ranks the proportionate share of your population that lives with food insecurity. Currently, we're at 22% here in Burke County, which ranks 90th in the state of North Carolina. Roughly only 9 counties have a higher proportionate share than we do. I think that's a challenge. We also, in this idea of disconnected youth or opportunity youth, these are folks over the age of 18 that didn't go to college, they didn't get a job, and they didn't go to the military. So they're not on an Employment Security Commission roll anywhere. They're not on a community college or university scroll anywhere, and they didn't enroll in the military. We rank 96th in the state. So only 3 counties have a higher proportionate share of their youth that may not have immediately found their path. When we look at local education funding, which I think is a core component of what local government is responsible for, we rank 96th. So the blue bar is the state average for county funding. The orange bar is Burke County. Now, one thing, in the last 18 months, we've made a significant impact here. We've raised, this Board of Commission has raised education funding 25%. When I arrived, the county was providing about $16.3 million to public education. Today, that's $20.25 million, so that's roughly $4 million a year, $20 million over a 5-year period. But that's still, that level of increase took us from 99th to 96th. And I think that it's an interesting conversation to connect education funding, food insecurity, displaced youth, and some other, I think, challenges that our community faces that economic development may at least be a partial remedy for. Here's just another couple of optics as it relates to public safety. Again, public education is a core component, critical service that I think local government is responsible for. Public safety is as well. Here's 2 metrics that compare our law enforcement sheriff deputies per shift. These folks work 12-hour shifts and they're running almost 11 calls in a 503 square mile county, which, as you can see, when we compare number of deputies per shift, doesn't compare favorably, leads to elongated times at times, has some officer security issues, and it should be a point of emphasis, I believe, for us to try to improve. We also know that one of the critical components of public safety is EMS. So when you look at our response time, we have 6 bases to serve 503 square miles. We run about 22,000 EMS calls per year, and our emergency response time is significantly higher than those of our peers. And one thing that we, again, know to be true, this orange bar is average response time. This blue bar is a positive outcome following cardiac arrest. So when you have a higher orange bar, the blue line tends to go down, right? So again, how do we add bases in strategic locations? How do we staff paramedics? How do we buy ambulances? Whether you live in Wake County, Mecklenburg County, Guilford County, Buncombe County, or Burke County, an ambulance still costs the same. The vendor doesn't discount the price based on where you live. And we, I think, as a local government entity, need to have responsibility in trying to improve these things. I also see our Medicaid population percentage going up. This is before Medicaid expansion. Many of you may be aware Medicaid expansion started back in December. So this is just a measure of our population, roughly 90,000 folks, what percentage become Medicaid eligible. There's many factors that go into that, but household income is, I think, the most common measure. And when you continue to see that go up, I think it's an indication that, again, we have intense pockets of poverty, and higher paying jobs may be, again, a remedy for that. Housing continues to be a challenge. This is directly out of Burke County MLS. In March of 2024, the average list price for a home in Burke County was $403,000. That's a 23% increase from 12 months ago. And what I would say is, when you look at a median household income to buy a $400,000 house with a 7% interest rate, that's a real challenge when our county median household income is far lower than what's required. So I think it's accurate to say, in today's times, it's difficult for the average Burke County citizen to buy the average Burke County house. That's a real challenge. This is measure of rental income. This dark blue bar is 2018 average cost or average monthly rental for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in Burke County was $570. Fast forward from 18 to 23, that same apartment or house or rental unit costs $1,400 a month, more than double. So let's look at our tax base. I've compared here 4 counties to our east and south, Gaston, Catawba, Lincoln, and Cleveland. When I average their tax rate, it's about 54.9 cents. On the bottom here, I looked at more of our regional peers, and I think the peers that this project would most impact, Rutherford, Burke, Caldwell, and McDowell. The average tax rate for those 4 entities is 55.3, so pretty close, within a cent and a half of being a similar tax rate. But look at these guys' tax base. The average is 22.5 billion. With our average, it's 8.9 billion. That's a 60% decrease, right? And the reason tax value matters is the revenue needed to fund government is the tax rate, which we want to keep as low as we can, multiplied by the value, and you increase that value by recruiting corporate investment, right? So we want these corporate citizens to help fund the taxing burden so that we can improve these areas that we've talked about without burdening that of the individual taxpayer. Here's what I would call revenue generation capacity. So this is multiplying each of those entities we just looked at, their tax rate multiplied by their tax value, assuming 100% collections and adjusted for population. And you can see the ability to generate revenue to pay for those services to fund education is simply lacking. And I think the best way to improve that is through innovative economic development. Here I've looked at more of a direct wage impact, assuming 1,500 jobs at $65,000 a year. This is just direct. This isn't indirect and induced. You're potentially looking at $97.5 million of additional payroll. Those are people who buy cars and buy homes and shop at stores and do all those things. When I compare that to our total county-wide payroll right now, we have a labor force of about 40,000 and our average wage is about 45,000. So we've got about 1.8 billion in total wages in Burke County. So this impact, assuming those metrics, is about a 5.4% increase, which is significant. Then I wanted to show it from a tax revenue perspective, assuming that a corporate client was located that had a $2 billion capital investment. To put it in perspective, Toyota just invested $14 billion in the triad. So I think that's reasonable. That would generate at our current tax rate about 11.2 million. For perspective, 1 penny on our tax rate generates about $1 million. So this is just an example. Obviously, you know, the variables could be adjusted, but roughly $11 million or 11 cents of new revenue, and we could invest money into public safety. We could invest money into education, and still have money left over potentially for taxing relief. That's the kind of impact. And I'll stop there and say, you know, it's not just we need new money to fix things. We're constantly working on reinventing ourselves and rethinking how we do local government, looking for efficiency and process improvements. And we've made significant strides in the last couple of years. When I mentioned a 25% increase in public education funding, that's not new money. That's just rethinking how we achieve our budget. But when you look at our tax base and when you look at our total budget, there are, I think, there's good arguments that additional resources would be certainly transformational. So about 56% of our total budget comes from property tax today. That equates to about $54 million. So again, looking at it proportionally, an 11 cent or $11.2 million, which would be roughly a $2 billion investment, would be roughly a 21% increase in tax revenue without asking any more from existing taxpayers. Those are all things that I think explain, or I hope shine light on why economic development is important and how it may impact some of the areas that we, from a data perspective, are not proficient. Now I'll talk briefly about the industrial park. One thing that I would say is it's been labeled a mega site. This is not a mega site, so the state has I understand it's large, and that's a commonly used word. But this site doesn't have mega site designations. The Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina and Department of Commerce reserve that right. It's an application-based process to get that designation. It requires typically 1,000 contiguous acres. This site is not that, right? So we use that terminology, but it is not a mega site. It's a large industrial site without question, but it is not a mega site from a definitional perspective. So two things have changed. Since the application that was originally filed in December and January. One, and I think we talked about these when we announced that we would be rescinding the application. The first thing is we've what I would call right-size the application, so it's not 1,353 acres. The application is only asking to include 795 acres. And I would point out there, of the 795, 440 is already zoned industrial, but it's included, and I'll talk about it in just a minute, only because we're making it more restrictive. So if we excluded what was already general industrial today, this would only be 355 acres, right? Which is a lot, it's still a lot, but it's not 1,353. So I think that's worth saying. And number two, back in May, the Board of Commissioners did a text amendment to the development code to allow conditional zoning, which, as we'll talk about in just a moment, gave us the tool to deal with some of the development code standards that you all wanted to talk about. Here's the original map. This purple for site 11, that's the 440 acres that is already zoned industrial and has been zoned industrial for some time. Site 12 and site 13, 8, and 10 are what are included in the 795 acres. So everything with a black X is not suited for industrial use, has no industrial value, and will not be included in any reapplication process in the future. So 11, 12, and 13, 8, and 10, okay? I think it's also important to point out this is a zoomed in version of parcels 11, 12, and 13, which total about 550 acres. Preliminary civil engineering, when we look at topography, when we look at stream setbacks and those type of things, the civil engineering firms that have worked with us have advised that roughly 30% of that is developable, so 165 acres. Now that is still a significant amount of land to develop from an economic development value perspective. To put it in perspective, 1 million square feet goes on about 45 acres. So you can put a 1 million square foot building on roughly 45 acres. So 165 is still significant, but it's only about 30% of that large parcel, which leaves lots of room, I think, for us to use topography and existing shrubs and trees and other things for buffering and to deal with some of the concerns that we've heard. I mentioned that we'd had these community discussions and some private meetings, some phone calls, some homeowners associations, some Zoom calls, all those things. And we've had email questions, we've had public comment in commissioner meetings. And I tried to compartmentalize all of those concerns into these listed areas, starting with water quality, view shed, wildlife, who the end user is, air, noise, and light pollution, traffic, and sound. And so those are I would say, the focus areas that we tried to design standards to deal with. So here's the new map, and I'll try to explain the map, and then we'll look at the text. And by the way, the text is in one of those black compartments right back on this table. If you didn't get one, please make yourself, do that as you leave. But we'll go through it word by word momentarily. So again, we're only looking at the big parcel right off Dodgersfield Road, and then what would be 8 and 10 on the other map here. I'll start with water quality. So this light blue represents the buffer. In the state of North Carolina DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, regulates grading and water quality. They have a specific division for water quality, and they require a 25-foot setback when you're grading or building structures. You can't impede within 25 feet of an existing stream. The standard that we put in place and what this light blue represents is a minimum of 75 feet and collectively across the entire property, anywhere a structure may be or grading may be, we have put a standard in place that ensures that the average is 150 feet. So the state law minimum is 25 feet. Nowhere on the property will there be allowed legislatively to be within 75. That's the minimum. But when you measure from impact to stream comprehensively across the property, the average has to exceed 150 feet. So much, much more extensive than what you would typically see for a project this size. We also put standards to ensure water quality and stormwater management controls for during construction You're typically, the state requires you to catch, or excuse me, to plan for a 10-year weather event, 10-year storm. We've put standards in place that require the developer to plan for a 25-year storm. So what that means is larger and deeper stormwater management features, retention ponds, those type of things. And then post-construction, that would be permanent, the standards require that you capture the first 1.5 inches of rainfall. So the idea is that rain falls on the ground and sediment and those type of things get in the stream, and the stream ultimately goes to the river, Muddy Creek and Catawba. So the standard that we've put in place requires that the first 1.5 inches. So again, 50% more stringent than what is required. And my understanding is those are similar stormwater management features and similar water quality features that you would see at the coast for places that have shellfish and those type of things. So I think, you know, at least from my understanding, those type of conditions and again, deed restrictions, if you will help ensure that water quality is taken care of. The Muddy Creek and Catawba River have no risk of being impacted negatively from this grading project or development project. So the next standards that I'll talk about is existing trees and shrubbery. So if you've been by the property, clearly the trees are mature. I'd say 50 to 80 foot tall. The current development code says for industrial screening, you have to have at least 10 feet of depth and 5 feet of height, right? So I'm 6'5", so something shorter than me and something 10 foot wide. That's what the minimum requirement is. One of the things that we heard, again, from noise, sight, view shed, was when I'm traveling, especially westbound on I-40, and I have the view shed of the mountains, I don't want to lose that. So along this I-40 exit, we've put a 300-foot buffer, literally a football field of existing trees and shrubs. Certainly that is, there's also conditions that require that those buffers be maintained and enhanced, that they are subject to periodic review, and if there's a bug that hits in the tree or a tornado or anything that impacts the buffer, that be replanted or be replaced with something of adequacy. On the back side, this is a 200-foot buffer. When you start along this way, it's 150 feet of existing trees. On the other side of the road, it's 150 feet around these three corners. To the south, east, and west, and on the north side is 200 feet because, again, there's heavier residential homes there. We also put a condition in place that prohibits industrial entrance from Sawmill Road or the backside. We didn't, there will likely have to be emergency entrance for fire trucks and ambulances and those type of things, but no tractor trailers, nothing like that. And the conditions will require a traffic impact analysis to limit the number of industrial entrances. Ultimately, that will be a DOT requirement to meet their compliance, but our goal is to reduce the number of industrial entrances off of Dysertville Road to the minimum required by law, okay? So now I'm going to switch to the text, and there's a few more than that, but I think those are, the main components, and then we can switch to questions and answers. We've also done these environmental due diligence steps that are common. But for what it's worth, we have looked at the archaeological and endangered species. There's a phase 1 environmental and a geotech study that has been worked on. So I'm going to go through these one by one. If you have a handout, you're welcome to follow along. If not, you can look at the screen. So condition 1 simply introduces conditional zoning in Burke County. This is the first industrial conditional zoning district in the entire county. There may be others, but this is the first one. So we're naming the parcel numbers and saying that these will fall into this new district. Provision 2 is talking about if you're on Dysertville Road, the larger parcels to your left, the 550-acre parcel. And it says that along Dysertville and Highway 70, there'll be a minimum depth of 150 feet of existing trees and vegetation. It says that buffer will remain in place. On the back side, the far west side, existing trees and vegetation will remain at a minimum depth of 200 feet. And to the parcels along I-40, natural buffer of minimum depth of 300 feet. Okay? Number 3 is on the other side of the road, so this will be the right-hand side. And it talks about a minimum depth of 150 along the parcels that are border Soul Mole, and then 200 feet on the parcels that border Snow Hill Church Road and that property there to the north. Okay. Item 4 deals with stormwater management features, both during construction, post-construction, and water quality. And this says that a buffer will be on each side of the stream of existing shrubs with a minimum width of 75 feet. And again, remember the state requirement is 25, and an average across the entire property of 150 feet. It also goes to says at a minimum during construction activity, stormwater control measures will be designed to treat a 25-year storm. And then post-construction, there'll be permanent stormwater control measures to capture the first 1.5 inches of rain. There could be streams that aren't mapped. There could be streams that we don't know about. So we also added language that says if we identify streams, that they'll follow the minimum requirements as well. Item 5 says Soul Mole may include emergency site access, but not general access. So employees won't be going there and traffic and transfer trucks and those type things. Number 6 is about a TIA and reducing industrial entrances. Number 7 just says the district will be developed to meet and comply with all emergency response requirements as you would expect. Number 8 has to do with lighting the site. So we want to make sure that light doesn't escape the property. I think the trees will do a ton of that, but any lighting, outside lighting on the properties or on the building will have to be down, cut off lighting to ensure dark skies and that you're not having the stadium lighting impact. Number 9 says that we're reserving space for future trail connections. As we all know, there's continuing to be some activity and development up around the lake. And then number 10, I think is an important one. This is the prohibition of certain end users in certain industries. So we have, through consultation and talking through many ideas and options, prohibited any mining or quarry operations. There'll be no carbon black production. There'll be no raw ore or mineral processing facilities, no asphalt or concrete, no landfills, no garbage disposals, no scrap yards, and no heavy metals or metal plating and finishing. Those are prohibited from any end user. And that's what I have. I'm happy to pause here, or we can transition directly into the question and answer part of the forum. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Brian. But you can see a lot of work has gone into this project since the first of the year. And again, I want to thank these folks to my left and who have been our partners in helping us as we think through this. They are considered experts in these areas that work in our western region of North Carolina and beyond all the time. And so again, I want to thank you guys for helping us as we've moved along here. And so at this time, we will take questions and answers. And Madam Clerk, I know that maybe Brian answered some of the questions as he went through the slides. So you want to take us through what you think that has not been answered that you have on your emails first? Nope. Man.
I think what Kay was going to say is there were a few questions, and I tried to answer most of them that were emailed ahead of time. There are a couple questions that weren't, I guess, natural as part of the presentation. I'll try to answer those. One question is, why can't the board allow the community to vote on this project or this property development or this rezoning? And the answer there is there's no statutory authority to provide a referendum. There's limited authority constitutionally for what can go in a special election. And there's absolutely no authority to ask what can go where in the community in North Carolina. Some states allow that, but North Carolina does not. Another question is, if some of the property is zoned industrial today, why is it included in this discussion? And I would argue because we're putting restrictions on it to make safeguards for the concerns the community had. So I think that's the answer there. If we did not do that, in theory today, if somebody acquired it, or if the current owner, Great Meadows LLC, wanted to develop that for any industrial use, which, by the way, allows all of these things, that could happen today. And I think, again, the reason it hasn't happened is simply an infrastructure access question. The other question was, if you don't know who the end user is, why do you have 3 specific site plans? I think that's referring to this optic. And again, this is just preliminary civil engineering based on topography of the land and where the streams currently are. With current standards that we're proposing, those appear to be the most developable paths. That's really the only answer. Let's see, one of the questions deals with scenic overlay. So there's a scenic overlay that's heavy on that side of the county, and the question was, do any of these parcels, are any of these impacted? So since these other ones have been removed, the impact is minimal. Parcels 8 and 10 do have a scenic overlay that will be replaced with the conditional zoning standards. So that's that one. There's a question about when there'll be a next public forum like this, and I suppose some of that is feedback from you all as to whether this is helpful. I would anticipate if this is a useful tool and we all want to do it again, it would be during the next period of the process of the project, which there's really no way to predict when that may be. Following the rezoning, as we talked about earlier with the funding, I think that funding from the state will likely dictate the pace of development, both on infrastructure and land acquisition. So I would say that's a to be determined as far as when there may be another opportunity for this. Again, a lot of these, we had like 20 something, so I apologize, but one question, what year did the idea for the Great Meadows mega site begin? I don't know that we know that. It was likely before all of us. We can track it back easily to 2008 when Duke did a site readiness analysis, but we believe it goes further than that. It said, did the Great Meadows reach out to BDI, or did BDI reach out to Great Meadows, and who submitted the project to the state for grant funding? And I think that is a multitude of people over many, many years. As I've mentioned, Mr. Wood presented to the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina in 2017, and I think the state is constantly looking for product to develop to continue the success that they've had in positioning North Carolina as the most favorable economic development state in the nation. So I think I answered the rest of them during the presentation, Kay. So if you have new ones, we can entertain those now.
We did have a few questions come in during your presentation, and Mr. Glines is going to field those for you now.
So Mr. Hoffman provided a question. He wanted clarification with members of the Board of Commissioners sitting on the BDI board, how that makeup happens. Is there any conflict of interest?
I'll try to answer that question. Of course, BDI, as Brian said early on, is made up of the both municipal and county government. So obviously, if county government is providing those funds, a commissioner or more may sit on those boards. And so certainly it is of interest to the commission, as well as all those municipalities that have a part in the BDI composition. So each municipal and the county has representation on the BDI board.
Thank you. Do we know how much tax incentives at this time will go to any tenants and how those would be paid?
Brian may want to answer that, but at this time, we do not have a specific client, and those kinds of incentives would be evaluated based on what jobs they may bring to the community, based on what tax base they may bring to the community. So all those things are evaluated on a project-by-project basis, and so that's simply not something we have before us at this time.
Okay. Are other North Carolina mega sites already leased out?
At this point in time, there's a land left in Chatham County that's a part of their mega site, but they're pretty low on infrastructure. So you can make a case that that one is not currently available. And they've also had 2 announcements, which would make it hard pressed for someone to go into that land area. There is one in Rocky Mount, and That one has been there for a while. It had been taken, it reverted back to the owner when they had some issues with the owner of the company that purchased it passing away. It is my understanding that there is a project imminent on that site. If it has not announced, it probably will be announcing in the next week or so. A very significant project in the tune of multiple $1 million and about 2,000 jobs. When that one comes off the table, there is not, arguably what we have here is the next best available site in the state of North Carolina.
Okay. And I've reworded this one a bit because I think the question is there demand identified for this type of site?
I spend a lot of my time working with site consultants and with the folks from the state. Part of the reason that we continued, and I think of the interest from the legislator and others, is what I just touched on, the fact that so many of these large sites have come off the table. I just came back from a conference where Project Scout, which was identified and is being built outside of Columbia on a site that I've been aware of for quite a while called Blythewood. That's a $4 billion project with about 3,000 jobs. There was a Hyundai facility outside of Savannah, which is about a $12 million project. There are very, very few sites left, and there is demand for these sites. And as North Carolina identified 5 mega sites by their definition. None of those 5 sites can probably be ready within 7 to 10 years. We believe that Great Meadows moving forward could be possibly ready for a client to build on within 12 to 18 months. So you can see why that timeline is important and why we think this site is important for economic development in the state and for Burke County.
Thank you. Ms. Stewart provided a few questions. Currently, the EDPNC site still notes it as a mega site. Is there any issue with that? It's just the terminology. You can look, and there are multiple definitions of what a mega site is. When they did their mega site designation, it did require 1,000 contiguous acres. Technically, this site is contiguous, and it does exceed 1,000 acres if you add the McDowell property to it. That would give you just a shade over 1,000 acres. Now, all of these, since we're changing the zoning, the property is contiguous, but they're not all industrial properties. It's just a matter to me of semantics and terminology. Let's just suffice it to say this is a very large site.
Alan, I think it's worth saying, I was on their website today too. They don't have the updated map. So all the things we've talked about today will need to be transitioned to their website. So that may be misleading. If you look on their website, identified as economic development asset, it's the entire 14 parcels, which is inaccurate.
okay. This is a kind of a question about how do we attract employees to this region? We identified that within an hour and a half radius, there's so many employees, but how are they attracted to come here, and what is done to kind of facilitate that? How does that work?
So a couple of things that we know, currently there's 13,000 people a day that drive into Burke County, and a higher number than that drive out of Burke County for work. We recently completed a housing study with a national research firm from Columbus, Ohio called Bowen National Research. And you're right, Alan, about 2.2 million people live in a roughly 60-minute circumference. But I think people will travel for economic mobility, upward economic mobility. And, I think that, also retaining a portion of the folks who are having to go elsewhere every day, most east, for gainful employment will also be, helpful in meeting those workforce demands. To put it in perspective, our total labor force is a tick over 40,000. So 1,000 to 1,500 jobs is significant, but it's not unachievable by any stretch, in my opinion.
Okay.
And if I may, We're talking about a labor shed and that 2.2 million people of about 1.4 million people. We're not talking about just impact on Burke County. These wages that we're projecting are 25% above what our current average wage. I also put that in perspective, the 65,000 that we're projecting is what the state average is now. So what this does is give us a chance to elevate from where we are and give some other folks an opportunity to move towards a living wage and jobs, and be very, I think, instrumental in keeping more of our youth engaged and keeping them in the county, and start cutting down on that opportunity youth number, which is roughly 3,500 18 to 24-year-olds.
There was a question, what is a comparison between what the conditional zoning would do versus the scenic overlay, what that does? And I might be able to answer that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
The scenic overlay is in our zoning ordinance, it's not necessarily concerned about trees. It's more concerned about uses, and it has a long list of things that you can't do there, but you can do things like housing and retail. So what it recommends is material, like sort of a natural material, brick, stone, whatever, and color. So darker, more muted natural colors. Doesn't mention a thing about keeping trees or any of that sort of thing. I think the difference with the conditional zoning proposal is that you won't see the internal parts of the site with this buffers in place as you travel down I-70, Highway 70 through this area. Okay. Here's a question for the BDI board again. Is there any salaries for BDI members?
No.
Thank you.
Can we just check the audience and see if there's questions here? Maybe while you guys sort through a few more?
Yeah.
Just,
Can I ask you a question, please?
yeah.
Yeah. It was asked a while ago how long development on this site has been thought about. In the early 1980s, I led a charge to keep waste management services from putting the site in. And one thing that this this new zoning does, it does prohibit things like that in there. I mean, it was a heck of a fight we had. I mean, I involved TV stations and everything else, and we were successful at it. And one thing I'd like to add, if we have control of this by BDI, we can determine what's going to go in there instead of it being by Great Meadows themselves.
Yes, sir. That's right. Give her just a moment. It goes through the YouTube channel, through the microphone. I apologize.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, just hold your hand up and Madam Clerk will come to you and she'll hold the mic for you. You won't have to worry about taking the mic.
Thank you. Okay, I do have a couple of questions. On the two visuals up here, the one on my left and the one on my right, it would appear that those parcels on the right side are zoned planned residential.
So the
But yeah.
light blue is mixed-use residential, and the yellow is residential, R3.
So, but on the right side, like the purple, is part of it. So how, does that have to get rezoned industrial? Doesn't appear to be, or it's not the
No,
same?
so, yeah, so,
So that shape is light green on the left, which would make me believe it's residential, but then on the right, it's part of the site.
are you talking about this?
The purple shape.
Yeah.
And then the purple shape, that same shape over there is green.
So 8 and 10 is what this is. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I follow the question, I apologize.
It's, that shape is telling me on the left.
This?
Yes.
This does require rezoning, yes, it's currently,
Okay.
it's currently mixed use with,
residential.
and the yellow is R3, and this is, planned residential mixed use.
So it's currently not zoned industrial?
That's correct.
Okay. Next, are there any? All right. Sure. Are there any rules in place currently or proposed about the height of the buildings or structures that will be permitted?
We didn't put conditions that regulated heights, but I can tell you Class A industrial on average is 30 to 35 foot rooftops and ceiling clearance. So we proportion that against the existing trees that are 75 to 80 feet tall, and felt like that screening would be adequate. But we didn't limit the ceiling height in the building because end users, if you're trying to recruit aerospace was one of the things, they may need that full amount. So we didn't put text in there. But I think if you talk to folks who do this regularly, you're going to see something less than 35 feet.
I mean, could it be a 10-story office tower there? Is that?
So the question is, could there be a 10-story office building? And industrial doesn't describe that type of building.
Okay. So there would be some limits to the height of the buildings, presumably?
If it's an industrial use, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then my last note on the demographic that would be like employment. So let's presume I'm a human resources professional and I do open new centers in a number of different locations across the nation. So is it assumed that there would be a certain number of people relocating into the counties for the employment opportunities? And then is it assumed that that's going to put more demand on the limited housing, and that then we would conclude that that's going to increase housing prices all the more and make them even less affordable? Any thoughts on that?
So I have a couple thoughts, and I'll invite you to our next public forum, which is about housing, in a couple of weeks. But I think, again, reminder that there's about 13,800 people a day that travel into Burke County for work. There's another roughly 15,000 or so that travel out. Our first priority for these jobs for qualified folks will be upward economic mobility for existing people who live here. And then, again, providing a path for maybe people who are having to travel away. That net difference would likely be people. Obviously, if a company, probably executives and so forth, they would come, they would bring their own. I think the production and the supervision level would likely be regional within that 60-minute commute. Is there some chance that this puts additional pressure on housing? Of course, when you have growth. But when you look at some of our age patterns, we need that. Over the next 5 years, the state demographer is expecting our workforce age, people between the ages of 18 and 60, to shrink by about 1,500. And our fastest growing age segment is folks over the age of 75, which we need, but that doesn't answer the workforce question. So how do we deal with housing is more of an infrastructure supply and demand question. So we need to relax and evaluate modernized housing code. That's a big deal. The development cost in this county is tremendous for subdivisions. And we need to extend wastewater and municipal water so that we don't have to have half-acre minimum lot sizes with septics and repair zones. That's how we fix the housing problem over time. And I think there will be some net growth here, but I think our priority is our local folks.
Thank you. Can I,
Also, as I've been looking at housing and talking on that for the last 9 years as well, demand also drives more access, and a lot of developers who we have talked to have no desire to come here because they look at our demographics and the fact that our growth has been somewhat lagging behind other areas. So a development of this size also can help start to move that number of new housing projects that we have. And that also, so it's the chicken and the egg. They really won't talk to you until they see this kind of growth. And then you start to see some additional new housing come that would help level off that demand and hopefully keep these prices from continuing to escalate.
okay. I had a couple of questions here, Kate, thank you. Information on the rail service, and the role the community college has in workforce training.
So the question on the rail, currently, there's been no engineering for rail. There's no end user that requires rail. Apologize for that. Our partners here have been really clear that there's not a great way to get rail to the site. And our goal would be for the limited industries that may need rail, which is, in today's market, is fairly limited. We have an existing rail spur in place, and our goal would be to, if rail was required, use it and push that to that component. So I hope that's helpful. I'll let Dr. Wells talk about the community college.
Yes, thank you. The community college is directly involved in workforce development. When you look at what we're trying to do, our vision, our mission is that we're driving high-paying or life-sustaining wages for folks in our county. When we look at that, we know what our poverty rate is, we know what our FAFSA rate is, Pell Grants coming in, and then we've partnered with BDI from the college standpoint and opt-in or work in Burke to drive an apprenticeship program. We had about 5 or 6 apprentices 4 years ago. We're at about 50 now across 10 different companies, which drives in and brings people in. And then the other thing that is really important that you look at this is the types of jobs that folks are going out to. So we look at our program mix from manufacturing to construction, horticulture, all of that driving into what are the jobs that it feeds. So apprenticeship, internships, working with the high schools to get students who want to stay. And then the last thing I'll say, we had an economic development study done on the college just about 4 years ago. 1 out of every 15 jobs in the county is directly related to the college and the work that we do. And the return on investment of the students who spend money with us is over $5 for every dollar they spend with us. So it leads to jobs, it leads to work that we're doing. So it's directly related and something that we are continually watching.
Y'all ready for me? Okay, here you go.
Okay, my question's on the whole theory of if we build it, they will come. I drive past, for almost the last 20 years, one of your industrial development programs, the business park. For 20 years, it's been clear cut. We don't have one building on there. We don't have one job. Why with confidence would we think that you could take a project 15 times larger than that and we're not going to see in 15 or 20 years 400 or 500 acres of our beautiful land sitting there waiting for somebody to come? Explain what's going on with the business park as an example of why haven't you been able to fill 83 acres that have been sitting there for almost 20 years developed? That's my question.
I think it's a great question. I think it's a fair question. One thing I would say is obviously the product is different, right? 83 acres and pads that are built for 80 to 100,000 square feet. So why are they different? Why would you do both? I think the question is because the product is very different. Why the stagnation, if you will, in the development of Burke Business Park is, in my opinion, you're not going to have industry similar with this property until you have infrastructure. And although the property was bought and the grading was done and a lot of the optics that people saw have been there, the infrastructure in the ground that really provides the opportunity for development, water and wastewater primarily, is still fairly new. And I think, so, that park is an incredible asset. I think there's still 3, maybe 4 pre-graded sites that are available. Again, they're 80 to 100,000 square foot type buildings. But I think you will see activity there in the future. But the reason that I think it lagged in development, and by the way, that this team is still fairly new, but there never was the development opportunity because of infrastructure, and that's the component.
Just a quick follow-up. When you showed that the big section there divided into 3 buildable areas, a couple of them were less than 83 acres. So why to me, we're getting sold a program that doesn't work, proven on your history. That has sat there for 20 years, 2005. is when we started spending tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money for nothing. We haven't received one tax dollar back. There's not one employee on that site other than a construction crew that's been working on a cement pad for a year. Not a building, not anything.
Sure.
So how can we confidently think you're just not selling us a pie in the sky?
So I think credibility and trust goes a long way. I think that's the point of today. There is a certain level of vulnerability and authenticity of saying we invite you in to ask us questions. This team wants to do economic development and wants to have credibility. Again, I think that the site Kathy Road was never going to develop without water and sewer. And that was an expensive venture that took some time to put in place. If everyone had to do it over again, they may have done that first before they graded it and created pads and done some of the optics. But the reality is I think you will see those things moving forward. I have confidence that you will. And as it relates to these sites, again, remember 1 million square feet can fit on 40 to 45 acres, right? So this, even though you may have 83 acres at Kathy Road, this is a 90-acre pad. It completely different product development, not really similar at all from an end user.
All those pads are less than what you have available right now.
I'm sorry, the total acreage at the business park is 83 acres. The largest total pad there is 33 acres. I will tell you that the building that is underway would probably be completed by this time next year. That leaves you 2 other pads that would hold roughly 200,000 square feet on one, 75,000 square feet on another one. As the manager spoke, when I got here, the water capacity was not substantial enough to handle the situation, so you had to have a water tank built. You also had 10 vacant buildings that had to be backfilled because of what happened immediately thereafter. All of those buildings are full right now. There's not a large vacant industrial building available anywhere in Burke County. For that matter, there's not one within a 40-mile radius. So, and as the manager spoke, that 90-acre pad will roughly hold 2 million square feet. It's a totally different product. And so, you know, these things they're not linear, but you have to go through the process. And 500,000 square feet going into the business park is a pretty big building.
I have a horrible feeling that in 20 years, we're going to drive by this beautiful piece of property that might have infrastructure, it'll be all cemented, it'll be clear cut, and we'll be talking about the same thing. We built it and nobody came.
Other questions?
Good afternoon. My name is Luke Harrell. Me and my family, we own Bell Farm on Kathy Road. The land that y'all were speaking of, what you were talking of right there, butts up right beside our business. It is a flourishing business, and saying somebody couldn't come in there and couldn't have a good business is total BS. We have been there since '01, I want to say, when we built that building, and it has flourished ever since. Saying that people was going to come out of town is total lie. If people are going to work, then we wouldn't have as much unemployment here as that we do. People are going to work whenever they want to work. You can build as many businesses as you want to. But all the family businesses around here, not even family, like Walmart, you look in that business and you say 45 cash registers. How many's in use? What, 3 or 4 maybe? They need employees. That is already something that is already established. Why are you going to take beautiful land, like he said, and make it into something that's going to just stay as a concrete pad, not even be used? I understand about development. I completely agree with it, because you need to bring in jobs to flourish your county, and I'm all about Burke County growing. However, this is not a growth thing. And another thing, everybody that's on the board that sits in them chairs up yonder, that's not here, and maybe y'all sitting right there, do y'all have any land that you live at or own that butts up to this land? That's a question. Does any of y'all own land right there? None. That's not going to affect any of y'all. The people that it's going to affect is the people that live around it. Me, my grandparents, Rex, Shoal, everybody on Sawmill, and my home church that is on Snow Hill United Methodist Church. It's a total lie with what you're feeding. I agree with development, but this is not development.
Other questions?
There's a lady in front here, I think, has a question.
I'll work
Okay.
and wait back here.
I've got a question for you. Are there gonna be any, might be for Mr. Athley here, are there gonna be any toxic minerals at this site, like lithium reduction? Or producing any toxic minerals? That's produced during lithium production. Is there gonna be any kind of lithium batteries work done here? And if so, are there gonna be retention ponds that are lined? I mean, you're selling us down the river right now. This water supply up there is a limited resource. And it's gonna, if we run it, we're not getting it back. And I have one more question. Does this 35.8 million include any infrastructure for the highways? Improving the exit at Highway 94 and Desertville Road and Highway 70. If you don't widen those roads and stuff, you're gonna get somebody killed. And that's what I'm saying, and some signal lights. That's gonna be ridiculous. It's gonna be a pain in the butt for people they're commuting on that highway right now to work here. And you're asking them to go through more hardships to go through your junk.
Thank you, Mr. Rooney.
I wanted to ask about that same intersection of Desertsville and Highway 70, because people come racing around through there. We live right across from Snow Hill Methodist Church, and they race down that straightaway. They don't realize there's a curve down at the lower end, and there's been several people that have had wrecks down there. And the Desertsville and 70 intersection desperately needs a stoplight.
Do you want me to hold it or you hold it? Hey, my name's Penny Ann Taylor, and I want to thank all of you for having this public forum session. It makes me feel good to see the Conservancy and Riverkeeper people here, and that you folks are a part of this. I didn't hear you speak any, but I'm glad you're here. I have a horse farm here, and I wanted to make a point of being here for this meeting because in April and May and June, I drove 4 times to see a horse in South Carolina, and I drove by the mega site on I-77 those times back and forth. And I was so accosted by an industrial odor that was so foul for the miles that you drive through there. I'm not against economic development, but we are nature's playground, and we got to keep it nice if we want anybody to come. It doesn't matter how much you're paying people to work. If they're going to be accosted by that kind of odor, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it to do it to this beautiful place. So I would say, you know, I don't remember if it was Mr. Wood or Mr. Britton that mentioned other mega sites around this state and South Carolina. I'm just wondering if anyone has reached out to those communities and said, are you happy with it? Is there anything you would have done differently when this was being developed? How can you change it to improve it? I'm not against the development aspect of it, but I am against going into it without thoughtful, extreme consideration for what we have here in Burke County. I don't want to see it get harmed or injured in any way. And so I just want to make sure that if we go forward in this direction, that it is incredibly thoughtful. And that we reach out to those that have already done it and find out what went wrong. what could be done differently. Thank you.
I appreciate the conditional zoning requirements that you've imposed on yourselves here. What's to prevent those from being changed in the future?
Well, they are legislative in nature. They are law. I mean, they literally, I expected one of the questions to be, what if somebody doesn't follow them? And that starts the code enforcement process and ultimately ends up in court, and a judicial process enforces them. Anything that's legislative can be changed. There's no way around that. Our Congress or our North Carolina General Assembly can change law. They just can. If a Board of Commissioners somehow voted to remove the standards at some point in time, that could happen. I think it's low risk. I think it's low likelihood. And if it was developed before that, then it doesn't matter. But to your point, anything that's legislatively can happen and can be undone. I think that's, if the standards are considered and approved, I think it's up to the community to make sure that they are kept in place.
Okay, I had a couple of things I could ask real quick. Someone noted that they'd love to hear from the river keepers and the other environmental folks who are here.
I can start. Good evening. I'm Brandon Jones, Catawba Riverkeeper. We don't come to every one of these meetings. There's a lot of developments all across the Catawba River basin, but this is one of the largest ones, and this is one of the most important. We're at the headwaters, right? So everything that happens up here impacts the entire basin. We got involved last fall, like everybody else. We heard about this project, and we were very concerned. But this parcel is already zoned industrial. It could be developed, part of it, as we saw right today. And so we want to make sure that as we move forward here, that we are always advocating for the river and for water quality. It would be ideal, from a water quality perspective, to have all of our streams and rivers, lined with 300 to 500 foot buffers everywhere. Buffers are one of the best tools that we can have. And so when BDI came to us and said, hey, what can we do to protect the water quality on the site? Buffers are number one. And they met us kind of halfway on that one. We recommended 300. They put 150 in there. We recommended several other things. Some of those they've adopted, like that 1.5 inch. Our colleagues on the coast have that. They do protect shellfish, and it's done a pretty good job over there on post-construction stormwater. So we kind of gave them a laundry list of all of the best practices around the state. Obviously, it would be best if this stayed, trees and forest, et cetera. But that's not our decision. That's a decision of the owners of that property and of anybody that might buy it in the future. And so if the property is going to be developed, then there are things you can do to be good neighbors, to protect our resources. And so that's what we've laid out in this list. And we're happy to see that most of those have been adopted.
I'll be glad to share some comments. Well, like everybody in this room, we found out the same way when it was in the media and the newspapers, when the General Assembly members and elected officials regionally announced the project. And looking back, yeah, there was a lot of inadequate information at the time that really, I think everyone recognizes, including the county, kind of was not a good way to do things. Our perspective, we're Foothills Conservancy, your local land trust. We're very grateful for this opportunity to participate, provide input, and discuss constructively land and water conservation measures. We're not water quality experts. We're not engineers. But what we do and have done for 28 years is land and water conservation on a voluntary basis with a range of partners and landowners, including family farms, local landowners, corporate landowners. We've come a long way since we were asked to participate on the Lake James task force when there was a lot of concern, and right concern, about how the lake was being developed residentially. I think the negotiated settlement that came out of that in which we participated, the task force came up with a concept, achieved some great things for Burke County, its citizens and visitors, that made nature's playground possible. We have a 4,000-acre state park. We have current residential subdivisions that are creating tax-based benefits, but the buffers and all the conservation and water quality measures are vastly different than what it was before 2005. So we're glad to be here, participate. It's premature to draw conclusions, us, or take a position, but what we're interested in is to constructively participate and try to find a way that land trusts our philosophy. Land conservation, good land conservation, depends on healthy communities and economies. You can't have one without the other. This county is kind of frightening, some of these trends that we're seeing. We need to do something different. I defer, I'm not in economic development, but I think what I can say is the land and water conservation measures proposed and outlined tonight are meaningful. They exceed the state's requirements, and sure, I think there's going to be constant maintenance and permitting and processes like that that will look very closely, those experts, stormwater control and so forth, but land development decisions do cause change, and we hope that in the end, some of the other Great Meadows properties are dedicated for conservation, open space, and maybe provide trail connections for people to enjoy.
And I'll give you the Lake James Environmental Association take on this as well. We're a group of volunteers, and we're here to really protect and preserve the environmental health and the natural beauty of Lake James and its watershed. Now, while technically this Great Meadows site is not really part of the watershed, it really does affect the entire area. With my colleagues sitting next to me and others in their organizations, we were able to partner and come up with a conservation plan, which we proposed to the county back in February. They listened. And I think they listened to all the community members as well. We were very encouraged because they invited us to the table for us to have really open dialogue about what we felt was necessary to protect the environment, because we need to do that. And as Brandon mentioned, while not everything that was in that conservation plan was as we would have liked to see it, they really made great strides in helping to protect. So I think the county has been really favorable on this.
Okay. I had a couple of questions. I lived all over the world. I've lived a lot in the United States. Tax incentives for businesses coming in are just a norm. And I want to know if the commission just assumes that tax incentives for large industry are going to be just a given, and if that's the case, then what does that do to the income structure or the profitability structure of this particular site? The other thing is, I'm definitely concerned about water. Now, I live on Lower Powerhouse Road. I'm one of the dam people because I'm below the dam. This won't affect me either. But I do have issues with really preserving our resources and making sure that industrial site would not be overly washing or overly taking more water than we can actually handle for the amount of people we have in this county. And if somebody would address that, I'd really appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to ask Alan to address the question in terms of economic development.
Incentives are, I mean, we would all probably prefer that they never have been created, but that genie is out of the bottle. And there could be impact. These are looked at individually. The numbers that he gave were based on the full investment. It could be a significantly more investment than that. We do not know exactly what that would be until we do have a client. From the water usage, we would be looking at the permitted amount that is allowed to be drawn out of the lake right now, and that's what we've utilized for numbers to show what's potentially available. So this is not asking for increased permitting from what is currently being drawn from the Catawba River Basin. So we don't see that as being a significant impact or having real impact at all on the water levels of the Catawba River or Lake James. They're already permitted numbers by the current users.
I had a question here. The question is there a way to notify non-residents in the area who own property near Lake James about this proposal? And the example was that I don't know that this is true or not, but it says that the Charlotte Water Interbasin Transfer Communication Model could be an example, but what the example was is sending a letter to all residents who are in this area. And I think if I answered it from a rezoning standpoint, we follow the state rules for rezoning notification process, and we notify adjacent neighbors ourselves. We put out a Z sign. Many people saw a Z sign out there, and we also notice in the newspaper and on our website for public hearings related to rezoning efforts, but mass mailings are not something that we do in the planning department, but there could be other comments to that regard.
Other question?
About this R3 zoning you have to the west west of the mega site or the industrial site and north of I-40. Are you going to put cheap housing projects in there or multi-family units? I mean, it said something. Somebody said something about projects a while ago. I'm just curious. I mean, you said there's a housing shortage. I mean, are you going to try and cure that by putting low income housing in that area?
Thank you, sir. I think I can answer that. That's current zoning out there, and that property is owned by the folks who have it. There's no other proposals in place for the property surrounding this site. So that's just R3 zoning is existing out there today. It does allow a variety of uses, and development plans are reviewed by the planning department and our partners, environmental folks, environmental standards, emergency response, DOT, things like that nature, but we don't have any other proposals for areas, those areas right now.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Got one back here?
All right.
Hi, I have a background in industry, I won't get into that, but has groundwater contamination been considered, and the industrial waste disposal and the possibility of what's called injection wells, where hazardous substances are actually pumped down into wells to get rid of them? And that's something that happens, and I'm just wondering, it's called an injection well, and I'm just wondering what, if any of that's been looked at, because groundwater contamination, wells, you know, the water actually runs underground, and it can affect areas much farther than where this site is located. I'm wondering if anyone's looked at that as a consideration, and if there's limitations being placed on what these industries can do to inject toxic substances into the ground, and once they're in there, they're really hard to get rid of.
I've not seen the phase one study, but I assume, given the way this has gone, that they did not find any legacy pollution on site.
I'm not referring to legacy pollution.
Right.
I'm referring to
Future.
what these industries are allowed to do, because this is the phase when this is determined. Because if it's not addressed, an industry comes in, whatever loophole they put in a well, nobody's really aware of it, and that stuff gets pumped down into the ground. So there needs to be addressed on what are the hazardous substances, because most industries create hazardous substances. How is that going to be addressed? How is it going to be transported? What's the mitigation risk? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so a good point, all of our groundwater is connected to our surface waters. And so that is something that we are obviously very concerned about. Under current North Carolina law, though, you're not allowed to inject your waste. There's lots and lots of legacy pollution, particularly around basically every dry cleaner. But current law, you are not allowed to inject your waste. In fact, the Supreme Court recently just ruled on this. It's called the Maui decision, that any waste that you do inject in the ground and it goes into surface water is actually now a violation of the Clean Water Act. It's actually a slight expansion of that rule in the recent years. So while we are very concerned about lots of different types of industrial waste, we did come up with a list based on our experiences as an organization of other types of industry in this area that have caused problems. And so that's the list that you see up there. Those are kind of known issues, things that we really do not want in our area. It is not exhaustive, right? There's probably some other new type of industry coming down the road and some new type of chemical that's going to ruin my week or year. But I think that's something that we are always concerned about, is future types of contamination.
Oh, I can hold it. Okay. So my question here is why here? Why this area? Why this beautiful area of Nature's Playground? There's so many other distressed areas in Burke County that they can be redeveloped, jobs can be created. There's Drexel, there's so many different areas that can be utilized with this $38 million, but to go in and destroy this beautiful area that is so close and has never been touched is just unconscionable. Also, we've had meetings and we've had discussions over the past year, and there's been about 3,700 people that have signed a petition indicating that they're opposing this, but it almost sounds like this is already in the works and that it really doesn't matter if we're here or not and we have an opinion opposing something so catastrophic in our area. We've had meetings with Mr. Blackwell, who has stressed to us that he recommends that they disperse this money into other areas that are much more depressed and can be utilized in so many other good ways rather than destroying beautiful, pristine areas that could potentially have significant contamination, just as the gentleman behind me said. There's so many variables and so many unknowns. Could be not only the groundwater pollution, not only the water shortage, but of course the air pollution that the other lady was discussing earlier, and the traffic pollution. It goes on. And I know that there's significant reasons behind picking this land locking area of the Phillips family, who is selling these parcels to, obviously they want to sell their parcels, that's fine, but there are so many other areas that this can be done in, and if you look up the history of mega sites, they're not going very well. If you look all throughout North Carolina, go check it out. But this map here, there's 3,700 people that have signed this petition. Most all, except for 9%, are in North Carolina. So I urge you to go to Stop the Burke Lake James Mega Site and sign that petition and look at all the people that are opposing it. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think we've heard most of the questions, and again, I want to thank our panel tonight, all the folks to my left and folks to the right. You can continue to submit questions to our email address there if you like. We'll try to continue to consider those. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight, We have worked hard over these last 7 months to try to address many of your concerns. So I think with that, anything else you want to comment on, Mr. Deputy? All right. Again, thank you very much for coming tonight, and we appreciate your attendance.